Shana Tova. And Shabbat Shalom too. Hey, thanks. So, contrary to my typical pattern, I am not beginning with an old Jewish joke, but instead with an actual true story, something that really actually happened. In fact, a few people who are in this room right now, teens specifically, might have actually been there for it, because this is something that happened at last year's BBYO International Convention in Orlando. Where are my IC folk at? Is anybody IC here? No? No ICs? Come on. Oh, see, I see a couple of hands here. Okay, great. All right, so you all might have actually, by the way, you registered? No, you're not registered. You could be registered. Okay, good. All right, great. So here we go. Rabbi David Wolpe, who is a true rabbi's rabbi, was on a 4-person panel at the convention. And the final question was posed, what gives you hope? Rabbi Wolpe had planned to answer in the simplest and frankly the most pandering of terms, the 4,000 plus energized and engaged young Jews at this convention. But of course, that's what all 3 of the previous panelists answered. So instead he said this. So I'm in this conversation with my great-great-great-grandfather, and he says, David, why do you look so sad? And I tell him all about the year that I've been spending working with the Jewish student population at Harvard, how challenging it's been. And he stops me and he says, whoa, wait a minute. There are Jews at Harvard? And I answer, well, yes, but I have to tell you, some of those Jews don't even accept the legitimacy of the state of Israel. He stops me and again says, wait a minute, David. Did you just say that there's a state of Israel? And that gives me hope. Think about it for a little while. On Erev Rosh Hashanah, Rabbi Plotkin shared a fascinating study of nations around the world who, when asked if the world was getting worse, better, or staying the same, fairly universally answered that the world was getting worse. And by the way, this was a survey that was not done recently, but before the COVID-19 pandemic, and one can only imagine what people would say today. You know, nostalgia for some kind of remembered better times, or the notion that things were simpler, easier, more connected, all of this is a part of the human experience. There's even actually a Jewish principle that any successive generation's Torah teachers can't possibly be as good as the ones of the generations that came before, going all the way back to Moses at Mount Sinai. And I got to tell you, as a rabbi, talk about being set up for disappointment. I mean, seriously, this is also one of the reasons why there are so many Jewish therapists out there, you know, all just not as good as, anyway. I'd like to quote, though, in this holy morning, the seminal Hasidic melody, Shomrei HaEmunah, by the famous Harav Velvel Yoel, where he says, the good old days weren't always good, and tomorrow ain't as bad as it seems. No fair, you heard it the first time around. Yes, that was Billy Joel, you know, keeping the faith, Shomrei HaEmunah. Anyway, all right. It's a tough crowd. This past summer, Pam and I spent some time in New Paltz, New York, where we first met. We try to get up there at least once a year, celebrating the best kind of nostalgia. On our previous trip before this, we even brought all 3 kids along with us to see where Mom and Dad fell in love. Gross! For some time now, though, I'd heard rumors about a new museum that was on the cusp of opening. And in looking it up online, I discovered that it had indeed opened the previous summer. According to its website, quote, the Borscht Belt Museum is dedicated to preserving the legacy of the Catskills resort era and celebrating its history as a refuge from bigotry, the cradle of stand-up comedy, and a cultural catalyst that changed America. So, following years of anticipation, they opened midsummer 2023 in the United Home Bank building in the middle of Ellenville's downtown historic district. The structure itself, the building that they are in, is part of the story, as this was one of the only financial institutions in the area who would grant loans to the Jewish hoteliers and bungalow colony operators who started to arrive in the 20s and the 30s. For years leading up to the opening of the museum, the building had been in disrepair, mostly unoccupied and forgotten. The first floor now houses the initial core exhibition, titled And such small portions. Food and comedy in the Catskills resort era. A couple of you, by the way, recognize that joke. It's number 835, right? It's a good one. And such small portions. Ba-dum-bum. Right? Look it up, 835. That's good. Exploring the museum, especially for me, was a treat as someone who only experienced the very end of the Jewish Catskills, having celebrated my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary with a family retreat there in 1993, and song leading a retreat there just a few years before they closed for good in 2009. Though I know that many in the congregation today have childhood memories or honeymoon tales of the historic institutions like Grossinger's, the Concord, or Brown's, in their golden years of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there is no question about the legacy of the Borscht Belt informing the basis for stand-up comedy, as well as many pop culture touchstones. The culinary legacy of these institutions shapes the taste buds of Ashkenazi Jewish American food history. And even decades after their demise, people continue to dream about some kind of Catskills renewal. In the museum, you'll find reproductions of the lavish menus from various hotels. There's lots of video recollections from many of the famous comedians who got their start on those stages. The curators actually make use of the large bank vault in the middle of the space to fully recreate a 1970s guest room from Kutcher's Resort, complete with green shag carpet on the walls, and an actual original bedspread and matching curtains in swirling lime green, mustard yellow, forest green, and white. Swirling patterns that could easily induce vertigo. It's something to behold. The museum itself is heavy on nostalgia, and to that end, they've hosted food festivals and klezmer concerts every year in order to try to raise the funds to fully realize the vision of the museum. However, in addition to the nostalgia, the curators turn an academic eye towards the question of what brought about the end and then the total death of the Jewish Catskills. Three primary factors are identified. First, they note that the advent of air conditioning made it less of a necessity to flee cities during the hot summer months to take refuge in the mountains, right? The mountains, right? Next, the factor of relatively inexpensive air travel opened up destinations nationwide and then worldwide for Jewish travelers, as opposed to returning to the same destination year after year and being constrained to somewhere accessible by car. But the third factor that's pointed to was the most substantial in bringing about an end to the Borscht Belt era. As Jews began to assimilate, as we were more readily welcomed into the broader American society, as they were less likely to be turned away with the signs that once read, "No dogs, no blacks, no Jews." As Jews started to see themselves as part of a broader society, they had less of a need and, frankly, less of a desire to find a sense of belonging, a feeling of comfort, safety, and welcome by being among their own people. In other words, it was Jewish success that killed the Borscht Belt. You know, success is a very relative term, though. You could say that once Jews were largely incorporated into the great American melting pot, there was no longer a need for the Catskill havens. Many of you, like me, grew up with the concept of that great American melting pot. Although, to be perfectly honest, during my elementary school years of the 1970s, there was already a vast debate raging between whether we wanted to be a melting pot or a salad bowl. And I know that talking about either of those on a fast day is a little ill-advised, right? People are picturing salads right now, right? Stick with me here. By the way, the food metaphors get worse. I find it fascinating that the notion of America as a melting pot was popularized, not invented, but popularized by the British Jewish playwright Israel Zangwill, whose 1908 Broadway production, The Melting Pot, was a tremendously successful and influential play, leaving a major impression even on President Teddy Roosevelt, who met several times with Zangwill to express how excited he was about what the play said about the Americanization of immigrants. The line from the play that really captures Zangwill's message is as follows, quote, "America is God's crucible, the great melting pot, where all the races of Europe are melting and reforming, Germans and Frenchmen, Irishmen and Englishmen, Jews and Russians, into the crucible with you all. God is making the American." Of glaring note, as it ought to be to us in 2024, is that Zangwill's melting pot clearly leaves out basically all non-white Europeans. It's not the kind of melting pot we'd want. The play, by the way, is kind of a bridge between Romeo and Juliet and Fiddler on the Roof. And Zangwill himself is a fascinating character, the son of Russian Jewish immigrants who came to England, raised and educated there. He becomes an ardent early Zionist, a friend and a supporter of Theodor Herzl. And I share all of this about him and all of this not to be too pedantic, but rather to emphasize that this debate between being accepted and integrated into the broader society or keeping one's distinctiveness and separations has been going on for centuries. And to a degree, I believe it still influences what we experience today. The questions of immigration, assimilation, the borders and boundaries of what it means to be an American are an active and frankly not entirely healthy part of our national conversation in recent days, months, and years. We do well to remember the story of our own ancestors when they came to these shores, whenever they came to these shores, as tired, poor, huddled masses yearning to breathe free, to quote another 19th century Jewish author. Regardless of when our ancestors came here and how long ago, there is the constant tension of finding refuge in America through assimilation and preserving one's identity through particularity. These two images of melting pot and salad bowl are integral to understanding ourselves as a Jewish community in America in 2024. And somehow, those two metaphors also point out just how incredibly insufficient each of them is. It's also a very relevant conversation for Temple Isaiah, now in our 54th year of existence as a congregation, and as we approach the 20th anniversary of bringing the Torah scrolls through the doors of this sanctuary. Temple Isaiah, for those who are newer to this community or have never heard this, Temple Isaiah was founded by 7 families who gathered in a living room to envision a Reformed Jewish congregation to serve the needs of the growing Jewish population in the brand new city of Columbia. They had all come here seeking the vision that animated nearly everyone who made this place home in those pioneer years, a new American city where community was intentionally diverse in culture, socioeconomic, religious, and racial makeup. This was one of the first places in the country where interracial couples could actually purchase a home, well before federal housing policy made that kind of discrimination illegal. They were seeking the opposite of the redlining practices of Baltimore and so many other places that effectively made enforced segregated neighborhoods. Many of Temple Isaiah's earliest members who remain active today can tell the ideologically beautiful story of that time better than I can. Another feature, though, of this new city was the creation of the interfaith centers Columbia's visionaries consciously opposed and did everything legally within their power to prevent congregations from being built on freestanding buildings on religious institutions on incorporated Columbia land. It's one of the reasons why our address is Fulton and not Columbia to this day. Instead, the congregations established to serve the needs of this nearly overnight population shared space in the interfaith centers, first Wild Lake, then Oakland Mills and Owen Brown. Many here go back to those years when Temple Isaiah and the other historic Jewish congregations of Columbia shared space with their interfaith neighbors that were co-located in those facilities. Through some of the stories that many of you have told me, I can reflect that the experience brought about many blessings and vibrant relationships with interfaith neighbors, as well as a fair share of frustrations and conflict. Temple Isaiah grew and thrived within the walls of the meeting house, and ultimately went through many years of discussion and debate as to the future of the congregation, the benefits and the detriments of moving out of the interfaith centers and establishing our own building. Again, individuals seated here in our sanctuary this morning know these stories firsthand, bear the memories, both painful and joyous, of the years that went into envisioning, planning, and ultimately building our own synagogue home. My desire this morning is not to revisit those debates and discussions, but rather to reflect on where we are today, and to think of it in a larger context that I think has something to say about what it means to be part of the American Jewish community in 5785 and beyond, of where we might yet be going in the future. This spiritual home, this beautiful place that we're sitting this morning, was the product of the hopes and dreams of members of this community who envisioned a next phase of Temple Isaiah. The concrete planning itself began in 1997, fully 5 years before shovels were in the ground with the groundbreaking. And then, 2 years later, on October 31st, 2004, the generations of Temple Isaiah, many seated here in this congregation right now, carried in their arms our Torah scrolls along the 8.2-mile route from the meeting house to the doors of the newly constructed Temple Isaiah. And when the scrolls arrived, they were lovingly transferred from one past president of the congregation to another, through the doors of the sanctuary, down the aisle, ultimately placed by Rabbi Panoff into this holy ark. On Saturday night, November 2nd this year, we'll gather as a community to mark 20 years in our spiritual home, Temple Isaiah. I hope you're going to join me here to learn about the journey, to reminisce about what's transpired over the last 20 years as we've grown and thrived as a congregation, to enjoy a night of comedy featuring Liz Glazer, followed by a beautiful reception. We're going to celebrate the past and look eagerly forward towards the many blessings that are in store for our holy congregation in our beloved home. I'd also like to think about the very purpose of having a spiritual, cultural, and religious institution like Temple Isaiah. What is the mission of the synagogue in 21st century America? You know, those who spent their summers in the Catskill retreats or the bungalow colonies of upstate New York in the 30s through the 70s were seeking a place of refuge, a place where they knew they could be with their own kind, where they could let their guard down and as a hyper minority in America and feel as though they were part of some big Jewish extended family. Instead of a melting pot, they wanted to be in a bowl of borscht. You know, it's true, something so culturally specific that anyone coming from the outside would be lost or perhaps even unwelcome. That kind of insularity is not what we generally seek today. On the other hand, the experience of the salad bowl, which I think tracks very closely to the impulse of the interfaith centers and so much of early Columbia, insists that each individual cultural and religious expression is present in proportional representation, each maintaining their shape, form, and identity, but within the confines of the same container. But the thing is that the container can get crowded. And also, when you are seeking a particular place of refuge and sanctuary, but find neither, there's a tension that begins to develop. While the interfaith centers continue on and serve many congregations well today, for Temple Isaiah to grow into the fully realized congregation that we've become, and what we strive to be in the future, establishing our own space was the necessary next step in our development. And what we have developed here, what we've been able to accomplish over the last 20 years, is beyond the dreams of those who made this place possible. I remember a conversation with Denny Rapport, one of the individuals whose dedication and guidance made both the building of this facility possible, as well as the major expansion and renovation that we completed just a little over a year ago. One of the reasons why we can all fit here in the room today. Right? In planning the expansion, he remarked that when the congregation built the building, the working assumption was that the synagogue would basically continue to do the exact same things that it had always done, but it would be doing so now in its own space. What they didn't anticipate was the very factor of having a place to call our own would actively shape, expand, and reshape the community in dramatic ways over the years that followed. Possibilities that weren't even dreamt of by those who envisioned our spiritual home have become a reality and a blessing over the last 2 decades. Our continued growth as a congregation also coincides with a greater diversity within our congregation in so many ways. It is neither melting pot nor salad bowl that we've created here, but something different, more expansive, more inclusive. This is the place. This is the place where we have celebrated life cycles, the festivals and times of the Jewish calendar, and the milestones of our community over these 2 decades. The earliest students who began to learn in Temple Isaiah preschool were part of our confirmation class several years ago, and then were honored on this bima as they graduated from high school and are now midway through their college educations. A community that began with 7 families, all young parents at the time, sitting in a living room, are now able to gather with 4 generations of members of the same family sitting together in this sanctuary. It is, frankly, amazing. In preparation for our upcoming celebration, I've looked through pictures of baby namings and brisses, b'nai mitzvah, confirmations, weddings, and other celebrations here on the bima, the pictures that hang on the walls of your home with the backdrop of our Jerusalem stone ark and the distinctive geometric patterns of these ark doors. And this is the place as well where we've said goodbye to loved ones, comforted one another in times of national tragedy, and drew the community together just a year ago following the horrific attacks of October 7th, and again this past week to mark the 1-year anniversary. And the broader community, the broader outside community, has always known that this was a place that was welcoming and open to them. Our Jewish community and our interfaith and civic neighbors have been here from the very beginning. Our namesake prophet Isaiah is quoted as saying, "Ki veiti beit tefillah yikareh lechol ha'amim," for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples, declares my sovereign God. Right here in this space, Red Cross life-saving blood drives, Dream Builders spaghetti dinner fundraisers, HCPSS AP testing, the grassroots cold weather shelter providing a safe and warm place for the most vulnerable in our community to stay in the wintertime. And that, of course, is just the shortest of short lists of the myriad ways in which this place has been and will continue to be a gathering place for the larger community. Here, within the walls of Temple Isaiah, we seek and find our broad and inclusive Jewish family, expanded in ways that we could not have anticipated at the founding of this congregation. To quote the prayer for our congregation in this, our machzor, it says, "For our members, diverse in age, interest, and background, Jews by birth, Jews by choice, and those of other faiths who join with us, all who offer their time and talent, their love and commitment." The meaningful ways in which Jewish culture, history, creativity, activism, and spirituality are fostered within this holy space continue to be an inspiration for all who have observed and played a role in the growth of our community. And we seek to play our role in the larger community as well. This past March, I brought our confirmation students, parents, and a handful of TI members to the Ahmadiyya Mosque in Silver Spring to observe their evening prayers, to join with them in an interfaith iftar dinner during Ramadan. Our warm reception, even at the time of the most highest stress and tensions between Jews and Muslims, was based on the reality that through our Soul to Soul Women's Interfaith Initiative, members of that mosque and this congregation have been in relationship with one another for more than 15 years. And we know that we are always welcome in one another's homes and sacred spaces. As we appreciate the role of synagogues in the 21st century, we are clearly not in need of a Borscht Belt-style haven to insulate us from the broader world. But the need for particularity and a space of our own motivated our community to build this home as the next step beyond our development years in the salad bowl that was the Interfaith Centers. In the larger conversation about melting pots and salad bowls, at least one writer has put forth a healthy third alternative. And again, you're going to forgive me for the most food analogy-focused Yom Kippur sermon that I've ever given, and possibly the most food-focused Yom Kippur sermon ever given anywhere. Another author, this author, posits that the correct American analogy is not melting pot or salad bowl, but rather chili bowl. He writes, quote, "The chili bowl metaphor is designed to speak simultaneously to a collective American identity and smaller group and individual identities. Ideally, this metaphorical framing will lead people to envision a conception of their identities that fuses both American and more unique attributes. It offers the right balance between individuality and commonality, unique and identifiable ingredients tied together with a single sauce." The author suggests the analogy also as a way of bringing together disparate factions in American society today, and how desperately we need to see ourselves as connected to one another in this country. Not seeking to blend together into some homogeneous thing, but recognizing that while each culture and community retains its distinctiveness, they are unified by a connecting sauce. He points out that we, as Americans, are united by common characteristics, holidays, ideals, lifestyles, and identities. By the way, yes, that does spell chili, right? Because he's an author. That tie us together, that bind us to one another through the social fabric of American society while retaining our distinctiveness. What is created when we do this is something much more holy. And not for nothing, by the way, as Pam pointed out to me, the longer you cook a chili, the richer and more delicious the flavor becomes. We're on our way there. Our diverse nation, made up of many distinct communities, faiths, and outlooks, is stronger because of the common sauce that binds us together and honors our distinctiveness. Neither melting pot or salad bowl, but chili. May we continue to value the history that we represent as a congregation, both the 4,000 plus years of Jewish history and the 54 years of congregational journey we've been on as Temple Isaiah. May we find meaning and belonging within the walls of this, our sacred home, as we honor the 20 years we've spent celebrating the joys and comforting the sorrows, lifting up our prayers and joining hands together in this space. And may we continue to see ourselves bound up with our greater community, inextricably bound to our neighbors, strengthened by our diversity and encouraged by our shared values, joined by the commitment to sharing this community, this country, and God's world as we commonly seek to bring about a better tomorrow. From me and my family to you and yours, I wish you Gemar Chatima Tova. May we all be written and sealed for a good, a healthy, a better new year. Shana Tova.
I be saved. May I be free. May I find space to just be. King Hiratzon, King Hiratzon. May I find my way back home. King Hiratzon, King Hiratzon. May I find my way back home.
May we be safe.
May we be safe. May we be
find space to just be. King Hiratzon, Can you hear our song? Can you hear our song? May we find our way back home. Can you hear our song? Can you hear our song? May we find our way back home.
We read together.